to go while I was sitting in the seat. We're going to be in John chapter 1, verses 43 through 51, which is the end of the chapter. And we're going to be talking today about Philip. We've been working our way through the 12 apostles, and we're starting to get to the ones that we're going to have to sort of bunch together and talk about at the same time, because there's not a lot told to us about some of these individuals. But Philip is one of the ones who we actually know quite a bit about. There's more that Philip did than we perhaps often remember. But we're really going to focus in on this portion of Philip here in John chapter 1, verses 43 through 51. And we're going to use it because it's a very good example of what we see Philip doing when we see Philip in the Gospels. Now, some people get confused about this, and so I'm going to address this before we get into it. But the Philip from the Gospels, the Philip who is the apostle, is not the same Philip who waited tables and had prophetesses for daughters in the book of Acts. They're two different Philips. They're similar in some ways. They have a similar character about them. But they are two different men. And so we're going to be talking today about the Philip who was an apostle of Jesus. And this Philip was a man who very specifically loved to bring people to God. Almost every time we see Philip in the Gospels, he's bringing someone to Jesus. There's this case of Philip and Nathanael in John chapter 1. There's Philip and the Greeks later on in the book of John. Philip is even the one whom Jesus questions about, well, what should we do about all these people in the feeding of the 5,000? What's your plan, Philip? What do you think we should do? And so Philip is remembered for many things, not least of which, though, is his eagerness to hear lessons and to share them with others. When I think of Philip from the Gospels, I think of a man whose eagerness to bring others to Christ, to deliver the message of Jesus to other people. I don't know that there's another apostle who's more eager to do that than Philip is. That's what I think about Philip. That's what I think about when I think of Philip. Philip is a man who, from the beginning of when we see him to the very end, is constantly bringing people to Jesus. John chapter 1, very early in Jesus' ministry, in fact, even before he's technically begun his ministry, which happens in John chapter 2, after hearing about Jesus from John the Baptist, the following day Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and he found Philip, and he said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We found him, of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets spoke, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said to him, "Come and see." And Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit." And Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" And Jesus answered and said to him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered and said to him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Most assuredly I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." Now, it's generally accepted that the miracle here is that Nathanael is in some private place, that there's no one around, that the only person who could have known that he was under a fig tree when Philip found him was Philip. And yet here is Jesus telling him, as the two of them approach, before the advent of cell phones, that Jesus knew where he was when Philip had called him. And this was enough for Nathanael to believe. But here we see Philip in his sort of natural state. He's bringing people to Jesus. Even though Nathanael is doubting, to his credit, he went along with Philip. And Nathanael and many others were convinced of Jesus being the Christ. We later on, like I said, in the book of John, we see Philip bringing the Greeks. And from his name, Philip, which isn't a very Hebrew name, we can kind of discern that Philip himself may have been a Hellenistic Jew. He may have been a Roman. He may have been a proselyte himself. He may not have been Jewish in origin, and yet Jesus is calling him to come and follow him. He seems to have brought those in a similar situation to himself to Jesus. Now, the thing is if Philip is a Hellenistic Jew, as his name seems to suggest, then most rabbis, most teachers in Israel would not have given him the time of day. They wouldn't have taught him, or let alone told him to follow him and made him one of their closest and prized pupils. But Jesus immediately takes Philip in because he doesn't look to someone's ancestry. He doesn't look to someone's culture. He looks instead to people's hearts. And in Philip, he sees a man who is eager to teach and to reach people and to bring them to Jesus. When we think about Philip, every time we see Philip, he's bringing someone to Jesus. And if you're wondering, the point at which he brings the Greeks to Jesus is John chapter 12. Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast, and they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn Andrew and Philip told Jesus. We see that Philip is an evangelist. Philip's strongest suit seems to be to spread the gospel. But that's because Philip had this love for bringing people to Jesus, and it would, I would wager, serve him well all his life as one of the apostles whose job it is to bring the message of Christ unto all the world. And I think it's very important to understand the character of Philip, that he brings people to Jesus. But more importantly than bringing other people to Jesus, we see Philip brought himself to Jesus. And when I say it's more important, I don't mean that one soul is more important than another. But if you're going to be bringing people to Jesus, you yourself need to have been given to Jesus first. Verse 35 of John chapter 1. And again the next day John stood with two of his disciples, and looking at Jesus as he walked, he said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned, and seeing them following, said to them, "What do you seek?" They said, "Rabbi," which is to say, when translated, teacher, "where are you staying?" And he said to them, "Come and see." They came and saw where he was staying, and remained with him that day. Now it was about the 10th hour. One of the two had heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. And he first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "We found the Messiah," which is translated the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. And when Jesus looked at him, he said, "You are Simon, the son of Jonah. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated a stone. And the following day, Jesus went to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, it is generally accepted although it's not outright stated, as I just read to you, that Philip is that second disciple besides Andrew, because we know it's not Peter, because Peter is brought to Jesus by Andrew separately. But it is generally accepted that the other one is Philip, which is why he's then the focus of the next bit of John chapter 1, which would make Philip one of Jesus' first two disciples, the other one being Andrew. But regardless of whether or not Philip is that second one, Philip is very early on in Jesus' career, and he was definitely among the disciples of John. And when John proclaimed Jesus, Philip seems to have immediately listened. Whether he was one of those two or whether he simply was there and Jesus called him and he was like, this is the man of whom John was talking about, I'd better go listen to him. Philip shows this immediate concern about his own soul. He wants to do what God says, and he wants himself to do what God says, and he's more concerned about himself before he's concerned about other people. And we might generally consider that bad, but in this case it's good. Because you have to take care of yourself first. The obvious example is on an airplane. When they're going through, instructions concerning crashes, what do they tell you when the masks drop? They say, put your own air mask on first, and then you can help other people get theirs on if there's anyone who needs your help. And the reason that they say that is because if you're trying to put someone else's mask on and then you fall over unconscious, you didn't really help anybody, and you've just caused more work and trouble for everyone else. Well, it's the same way with salvation. Take care of yourself first. Be primarily concerned about where you're going, and then you can concern yourself about who you can take with you. It's a very positive trait to be as high time preference as Philip is, and that's a phrase I've been introduced to within the past year or so. And to be high time preference means that you concern yourself with the future far more than you concern yourself with the present. High time preference is why people plant crops. You don't immediately get food. You could have ground the grain that you've planted into food and ate it. But you're showing a high time preference that you understand that it's worth more if you plant it than if you eat it right now, that you get more later if you wait. Well, it's a high time preference thing to serve God. You're understanding that there's eternity, and that's far more important than the now. Regardless of whatever happens now, it's far more important to get eternity right. And that's Philip. Philip is concerned with where his soul is going, and then he concerns himself with other people's souls. He may be an evangelist, but he started with himself. And there are many evangelists who miss this point. There are many people who do not concern themselves with themselves and instead focus on getting everyone else to Christ first. Well, that's the opposite of the way that it should be. You need to start with yourself. As Jesus himself put it, first remove the plank in your own eye, and then you can worry about the speck in your brother's eye. Fix yourself first, and then you can deliver the message to others. And part of the reason that this is so important is, I'll use myself, although I'm not. I haven't done this. But if I was the sort of person to sleep around and go gambling every Friday, and I was constantly getting drunk, and then I went and told people that God loves them and he wants them to be saved and he wants them to be sexually pure, and he wants them to be good stewards of their money and their time, and to to avoid drunkenness and revelry, who would take me seriously? No one would take me seriously, because I'm not doing any of those things. I can't even say, well, I'm just flawed. Yeah, well, there's a difference between being a flawed human being who needs to work on a few things and being somebody who's constantly just involved in sin. I'm not saying I know anybody like that. But if you don't get yourself right, if you don't get your own household right, who is going to listen when you preach Jesus? And of course, Philip had his own problems. He was among those who fled that night. But in this, and in regards to Philip listening to Jesus first, before he went and told others about Christ, when we mix these two things together, the sin of fleeing and the fact that Philip moved forward, we find something we don't often talk about, which is that you have to be able to forgive yourself if you want to move forward. We have the golden rule, which is whatever you would want others to do unto you, do first unto them, which is a positive and a proactive statement, right? There's the Buddhist, don't do unto others what you don't want them to do unto you, which is a good rule, but it's not proactive, right? It's a negative. It's don't do things you don't want people to do to you to other people. But Jesus' statement is proactive. It includes, through the law of excluded middle and the just logical inference, it includes the negative of not doing to other people what you don't want done unto you, but it also has that positive element, which is if you want something done to you, if you want people to treat you a certain way, treat other people that way. Treat them in the positive. But yourself in the future is in many ways a different person from the you now. And you need to treat them like they're someone who's worth loving. You need to love your neighbor as yourself is the second greatest commandment. And if you really think about it, inside of that statement is not just the positive of treat your neighbor lovingly, but there's that hidden sneaky statement of you ought to love yourself. You ought to treat yourself like you're someone worth loving because you, just like everyone else, are made in the image of God. There is something about you that is worth loving and forgiving. And if you cannot forgive yourself, then you cannot move forward. If you cannot forgive yourself for your past sins, you cannot make yourself better. And that's not to say that you should just give yourself any excuse. As Paul says, what then shall we sin all the more so that grace may abound? It's not a blanket statement of just doing whatever it is you want. But if you cannot move past your own sin, then you cannot improve yourself. It is the removing of the plank in your own eye. You have to heal yourself, and then you can take care of others. And I don't mean this heal yourself in the way that the world means it when they say, well, you need to take care of yourself and spoil yourself. I mean that you have to seriously approach yourself as someone who Christ thought it was worth dying for, and make the improvements to make his sacrifice worth it. Forgiveness is essential to moving forward, both to yourself and to other people. You can be forever stuck holding grudges, or you can forgive and be forgiven. It's the parable of the servant who owed his master like 100 talents. It's an impossible amount of money to repay. That's the point. And he is forgiven by his Lord. And if he had actually worked on himself, then he would not have made the mistake of going and not forgiving his brother of a small 100 denarii. It's feasible to pay that back in a year or two. A denarii being 1 day's worth of wages. You can sort of live on a denarii for 2 days. So every 2 days, you should be able to pay back 1 denarii. Well, if you work that out, even if you stretch that out to 3 days, that should be about 1 year's worth of work. And even if it's 1 denarii a week, that's what, like 2 years? Was that 52 weeks in a year? The point is, it's an inconsequential amount of debt compared to what it is that he owed, which is 100 talents, which is around a small country's worth of debt. But when we see the apostles in the book of Acts, we see men who, although they had made a mistake just 40 days prior, a rather large one of abandoning their Lord and their God, they were able to forgive themselves enough that when it came time to prove themselves again, they did not disappoint. Because they had grown and they had realized that Jesus is the Lord. Philip was a good man, and I think in many ways underappreciated by modern Christians. Now, Philip may have not been part of the 4 fishermen that we remember so clearly, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. But he's undoubtedly one of the best workers that Jesus had at his disposal. Jesus, after all, chose him as part of the 12. He wasn't just one of the other disciples. And there were hundreds of people who followed Jesus around, but 12 of them were chosen as apostles. And so we should take note of those 12. There's something about them that we need to emulate. If we could be like Philip, then we would for sure enter in good and faithful servant on that last day. We want to extend an invitation. If you have heard the words of Christ and you believe that Christ is the Son of God, but you need to be baptized, you need to be forgiven of your sins, you need to be entered into the body. There stands this morning, just as there does every day, an invitation to come and put on Christ, to be baptized for the forgiveness of sins, into his body and into his blood. Is anyone here who needs to respond to an invitation? If you need prayers, if there's any way the church here can help you, I do urge you to come forward as we stand and sing our invitation song.